Hello there, Master Hellish here, and welcome to Hellish Prints 3D. Today we're going to take a quick look at some of the disasters, some of the things that went wrong so far in my 3D printing journey. I'm going to see why they happened and what I can learn from it. And when I look at them, and I've got them laid out in front of me here as some images which I'll put up on the screen, then I can see that there are three main categories. The first of which is feeding issues, the second is build plate adhesion, and the third is the model itself. So let's have a look at those quickly. First one, feeding. So this is a problem where the material coming off the spool for some reason doesn't get through the feeding mechanism down the tube to the extruder and on to your model. Now when this happens, the model just kind of stops part way through. The printer usually continues and the model is just left at a particular layer. I've noticed this can end up with large amounts of weird stringing all over the place. Sometimes, not always. And that must be really hard to restart your model from that point if that's the case, if not impossible. But if it's a nice smooth kind of finish on the last layer, it may be possible to restart. And I've seen some videos online of people telling you how you can carry on a print from a different layer height. But in these examples you can see that it just stopped, and I've either ended up with a bad finish or it's stopping part way through. Now in this one you can see that it actually failed on one of the last layers of the print. You can see that it successfully put in what I believe to be the first of three of the final layers. So there was only 2 layers left when it all went wrong. On this one you can see that there are many more layers that are missing. It's actually the same print when I try to retry, although I believe this is actually potentially the other side of the model. And I think we've seen this before, but this was due to a feeding issue. So what are the feed issues? Why did I have any feeding problems? Well, there's one that is not very common to me, and there's one that's happened a few times. The one that isn't very common is that there was an issue with the actual feeder itself. So here you can see a picture of the feeder, but it's missing the actual turny knobby bit, whatever it's called. And that turny knobby bit is important for helping to grab the material and pull it through. For some reason, it sprang off. It shot off the top of the printer and landed behind my shelf somewhere. Now I did hear this happen. So when I heard it happen, I went over to the printer and examined what was going on. Because the nozzle at that very moment, because I'd gone there quite quickly, was still extruding and the printer was still moving and everything looked fine, I didn't see the little handle, the little wheel behind the printer. It was out of line of sight, so I didn't notice the spare bit of my printer lying down on the shelf, and I didn't notice it missing on the feeder. This is what caused it to fail to feed because, well, without that component it can't pull the material through. Now why that shot off, I have no idea. Maybe it wasn't on properly in the first place when I built the printer, in which case it needed to be made sure it was down and properly secure. I've secured that back on and it's never happened again since. I'm just going to count that as a one-off. But something that's happened a few times is feeding issues from the spool itself. In this image you can see that it is going very straight and very direct to the reel, and it's kind of snagged in. And what I've realised that if your filament crosses over another part of the spooled filament, it can sometimes knot itself. And this is what I've found is it's very important to keep hold of the end of your filament. Don't let go and let it go all springy, because that's when the end piece can end up bouncing around and ending up going through one of the loops. So when you let go of most of the materials, especially PLA, I've noticed that I'm going to get one. So I take the clip off and it bounces around, it moves, you get these loopy bits hanging off, like this, just loose bits hanging. And if this part, the end piece, gets caught in one of those loopy bits, you've essentially made a knot waiting to happen. And when it's feeding through, eventually that knot can become tight, and then you don't get the feed. It just locks up. So what I do is I always now, whenever I'm dealing with a reel, moving it around, if it's loose, I hold the end. I keep the end tight, I keep it taut, I hold it in one hand, I hold it like this, move it around, and I have clips on the end. Come on, little clip. It's a little fiddly, but it just holds it on there and stops the filament from crossing over itself. And since I've been doing that, since I've used the clips, since I've been holding the end of the filament when changing the filament and feeding and moving around, I haven't had a problem since. So that's something that I've learned, to actually take care of the filament in that way, to make sure that the end is taut, that it's not crossing over any of the other bits, because I think that is what causes it. So that is feeding problems. Make sure your printer is built properly, all the knobs and bits are secure, and make sure you look after the ends of your filament and don't let them cross over. The next one is build plate adhesion. So there's quite a lot of topics online about getting your item to stick to the build plate, and that's what we mean. As soon as whatever you're printing kind of disconnects from that build plate, that's print over. You're going to end up with a squiggly top, if you're lucky, a bit of a squiggly top, or you're going to end up with just a scrambled mess of plastic. So this is usually a game over for a print, in my opinion. It must be very difficult to get rid of whatever's left and then try and restart your print. Luckily, I've only really had one occasion where I'd left the printer for a significant amount of time and this happened. Now, there is a couple of different ways that I've been experimenting with to try and combat this issue. The first is actually applying some sort of bonding agent to the build plate itself. So in my case, that has been some glue. So you can use the stick glue to rub a bit on the build plate if your build plate is compatible with using glues, and then print on that. Whenever I've used glue, I've never had a problem. It is an easy way to ensure that my print works, but it makes the print very difficult to remove from the build plate afterwards, putting it in the fridge once it's cooled naturally. So let it cool naturally, then put it in the fridge, helps it become a little bit more brittle at the bottom in terms of and come off, or using a very thin knife to try and start getting the print off the plate have worked for me in the past. But then you've got to clean all the glue off your build plate. It can be quite difficult or sticky or messy to do that. And then because you've had the build plate off and you've got to put it back on again and you've been moving it around, you've then got a big leveling job to happen. So using glue is usually my last resort. If I'm doing something small and it's got a very small cross-sectional area touching the build plate, I might use glue, especially if I want to guarantee that that particular thing prints. One of the other things that I've tried to do to combat this is to print with a brim. So the default setting on my printer was to have no brim at all. In fact, you used to just print a little line around. I believe it's called a skirt in the slicing program, and that was pretty much pointless. All it did was seem to waste plastic. And printing with a brim, I have found, works quite well. So if you've got something that's got a relatively large surface area for the build plate, then you might be all right without any glue. And if you print with a brim, it just gives you that extra amount of surface area. So if you're printing something you think, I don't think this is going to need glue, but I want to make sure that this goes, it hasn't got a massive amount of surface area touching the build plate, then I found printing with a brim. And you can see a brim on this organizer that I printed. It's very thin, very easy to remove. You can literally just pull the brim off, and if you've got one of those tools, oh, it's gone from my head again what it's called, a deburring tool. If you've got a deburring tool, then so you just pull the brim off, deburr it, and done, and that does help. So you could use glue. It's a little bit of an extreme solution in my opinion. I've heard people have good success with hairspray, although I can't imagine the amount of mess that generally makes all over the place. Brims help. They definitely help. So if you've got something that's kind of on the edge, maybe it's going to be okay by itself, maybe it's not. Add a brim, job's a good one. And for me, the thing that's worked the most for making sure my prints stay on the plate is just making sure it's good, level and clean. So making sure that the bed is true and level with everything by going through the leveling process, whatever that may be for your printer. For me, it's checking the nozzle height all the way around at 4 different points and adjusting the bed height to make sure it's all true and square with itself. And then making sure that that nozzle height is the right height. So you've got to have that level bed and the right height. If you haven't got the right height, if your nozzle's too high, it's going to extrude and it's not going to squish the plastic down onto that build plate. And if it doesn't squish it down, you're not going to get it to stick. If it's too close, then it can't extrude the material properly, and then you're not going to get a good first layer. So you've got to get just the right height so that when it extrudes, you get a nice blob nicely squished on the plate. It shouldn't be a round tube, it should be slightly squished down so that it's got that extra little bit of pressure as it goes round on its first run to actually squish and stick to the plate. Now, I did say something else, clean. I've noticed that making sure my print bed is perfectly clean is another vital thing. Almost as important as making sure it's leveled and got the right height. If my print bed is leveled and got the right height and it's perfectly clean, most of my prints will stick to the bed themselves without any brims, skirts or any glue, and most of the time it's all cool. Sometimes for things that are tall and thin with a very small cross-section area touching the base, then you're gonna need some assistance. But for a lot of prints, I don't use anything. I just make sure it's flat and make sure it's clean. So my print bed itself is a glass-like substance. I believe it's a composite. Maybe it's some sort of ceramic glass sort of composite. But it's a glass-like structure. And I remove every now and then I remove it and I take it to the sink and clean it. But that's not enough. The oils from your hands, the natural body oils that you have, is enough to stop the plate being effective. So you need to make sure that it is extra clean. So once all the main, if I've used glue previously, I'll go clean the plate. Once all that sort of stuff's off, I then clean the plate with this stuff, and I give it a once over with that. That just removes absolutely every little bit of grease and dirt and the microscopic stuff that stops the build plate from being any good. So there we go. That's the second problem that I've been having. Models not sticking to the plate. Yes, you can use glue. It's a bit messy. It will definitely do the job. Brims help, but the most important thing is to get it level, the height right, and clean. And most of the time, I don't have any problems with my prints sticking to the bed anymore because I've got an idea of which sort of models I need to get glue for because it's a very small surface area, and what other models will be okay, and keeping that bed clean and level. It's working well for me. And lastly, it's the models themselves. So some of the little problems I've had with the models are things like stringing on the models on the inside. Now, I have tried to remedy this by putting little supports in. So here you can see that I'm printing something, it's got a big arch on it. It's going to have some stringing on the inside because of the amount of overhang that's in that arched section. But to try and reduce that, I've used little supports, which I've added myself. So the model naturally has an issue where it is big and arched and has a big overhang, so you're going to have some problems. Adding supports in I thought would help, but it didn't really help when I did it. I haven't had any big stringing issues, and it's always been on the inside of parts that I'm not worried about the stringing problem being visible. So it hasn't been a big problem, but it's something that I feel like I really need to overcome, and I need to find a different way of tackling this. Unlike the other things I've already talked about, I don't know what to do about this. I don't have a solution. I haven't really learned what to do yet. Maybe you've got some tips and ideas that you can put down in the comments. That would be fantastic. But I think I'm going to watch some more videos online and see how to improve my overhangs or how to stop that stringing. Other problems with models may be that they come in a certain orientation, but it's not the best orientation. Here you see a failed print. This one is a organizer, and it's got a brim on it. Now this one is printed in 2 different colours, but that's not important for this. And yes, I did destroy it, but I had to. On the left hand side you can see that the slots are not perfectly square. They're bowing downwards, they're dropping in, they're drooping. And that's because as the printer is printing, it's a relatively large gap for the printer to print over, and the slots that needed for this project needed to be perfect and square for the drawers to fit in nicely. I printed this one off, I was looking at it and I thought, oh, with those droopy bits, are the drawers going to be able to get into those slots? And I put a drawer in and it got stuck and I couldn't get it out, and I ended up destroying the model to get the drawer out of the slot. So what did I do to fix this? Well, I printed it the other way. So you can see here that it is trying to do the overhangs and printing those individual drawer components in a kind of horizontal orientation. I rotated the part and then printed it this way round. This completely solved the problem. Okay, so all of those drawer components that you can, compartments that you can see there, are all perfectly square because of the orientation of the print. It's just layering up. There's no overhangs on that part of the print. Now, if you look at the print from this angle, you can see that on what would have been the back of the previous picture, there would have been some little nubbins, 5 of them sticking out, that would have had overhangs. But I use support for these, and it works, no problem. So small little overhangs like that are in specific positions, overhangs seem to work nicely. Big, broad overhangs, supports don't stop the stringing. So making sure that the model that you are using is in a good orientation for printing, and you think about, what bits are going to overhang, how's it going to overhang, can you add supports to help it, and what bits are important. So for example, on the Oculus Rift stand, it wasn't important for me that the overhang has stringing inside because it was the inside of the model. I didn't care. As long as the outside looked good and it was structurally sound, that's cool. So that didn't worry me. With the organizer, with the desk tidy, those drawers had to be perfect. So I had to re-engineer a different way of printing it by rotating the model and adding supports in different places. So there we go, folks. There is a nice little rant and talk and conversations, I should say, of the different problems that I've been having as I've been 3D printing and everything that I've learned so far. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please give me a like. It lets me know that you do like this series and maybe I should do more of them. But that's all from me for now. Thank you very much for watching. MasterHellish.net for all the information about me, my news and giveaways, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.